you joined the meeting before. And as you know, the session will be recorded. So once we record the session, you will receive a confirmation message. And if you put on got it, then the session, or you allow actually to be recorded, and then we can continue. I think also we will share the presentation after the session with all participants, and you can find it on the PM Fair website. Maybe you have to double check it, but we will keep you informed on that one. As you can see, the microphone is muted. You can unmute yourself, but maybe we can keep this for the latest of the session. And as you can see, until the Q&A, because I spoke with Annette and we decided to just put all the questions on the chat, and then Xavier and myself, we will run through the questions and we will see whether those questions can be answered immediately. Technical questions can be answered immediately, but all content questions we can keep it to the end of the session. Annette told me that if you have a question that is regarding to an abbreviation or something that is really, really focused on that slide, then you can ask it in the chat, and then we will, we'll ping Annette, and then she can answer that question right away. But we would like to have it in a good flow that she can keep the focus and that we are not extracted with other questions. So the other questions, the general questions, we'll keep them at the end. The important questions can be answered right away. Feel free to activate your video so Annette sees your interaction, that you are interested or not, for example, and then she can also put some extra confidence out of it to give the best of her. Also watch the chat for more information, type questions in chat, as I said, and then questions will be answered after the talk. So the session is recorded right now, so you will receive the message. You can go to the next slide, Annette. Of course, the PDU code. So this is PDU code. Maybe you can take a screenshot of it so that you have it, at your device. I think Xavier and myself, we will also add the PDU code in the chat in the beginning of the meeting and at the end of the meeting, so that everyone joins later on. They just can use that PDU code and put it in the place where they have to put it. So you can go to the next slide, Annette. And here we are. So the topic of the day, and I called her name a few times. So let me introduce Annette Vendelbo. She's going to host the session Sustainable Pace in Projects. Are they only buzzwords? And is it achievable in real life or just a dream? So I met Annette yesterday or the day before, I'm not sure when it was, but she's a lovely woman, really enthusiastic, and she's has a lot of experience in Agile, I think for more than 10 years. From now on, and we discussed that she, of course, Annette knows who she is. So I'll leave the word to her, and then she can introduce herself briefly, and then she can start with presenting and taking us into her story. So Annette, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Lo. And I'm not going to spend too much time saying any more about myself, other than my background is 30 years in IT project management. I've been working for big global companies such as Digital, Compaq, and HP. But 14 years ago, I decided to start my own company so I could nerd with agile methods and systems. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I'm working with clients to make agile transformations work and to discuss with them how they can make the best out of their Scrum or Kanban or whatever agile efforts they're doing. Apart from that, when I'm not working with customers, I'm volunteering for PMI Global, where I am a subject matter expert in the agile space when they have agile initiatives. And I'm also a global partner of Kanban University. I'm also writing quite a bit. I've been writing books about agile transformations and Kanban. I'm also doing some blogs, and just like now, I'm speaking publicly, and it's always about stuff in the agile space. So without further ado, let's jump onto the agenda, which looks like this. And what I'm going to be talking about, at first, I'll be kicking off by explaining why this was actually a challenge for me, this topic of sustainability. Then I'm going to continue by having a look at sustainability and social responsibility from the higher perspective, and moving on to asking myself, Does anybody disagree that sustainability is not a good idea? Probably not, but it's easier to say, harder to do. And then I'm going to look into why it is very difficult or quite difficult to achieve sustainable pace in knowledge work in general, and of course also in project work. And last but not least, I'm going to take a look at how we can make sustainable pace not still sticking as an impossible dream, but this dream can actually come true. So what a challenge. That's what I said to myself when I first saw the Benelux topic of this year. And the reason why this was quite a challenge is because usually when I do public speaking, it's in an area where I'm very comfortable. I'm speaking about Agile topics, Scrum, Kanban, Safe, Agile leadership, whatever. And it's something that I feel very comfortable about because I'm working with it each and every day. But this angle was quite different from what I'm used to. Talking about sustainability in terms of project management, I've never seen anybody talk about that before. So I think it was actually very innovative from the PM Benelux chapter. And in fact, it forced me to take a big leap out of my comfort zone. And I realized that what I'm asking my Agile teams to do almost on a daily basis is to go for it, push yourself, try to make a change, experiment, do something new, all of these things. And I realized that that was actually what the Benelux chapter was asking me to do in this case. And it forced me to practice what I preach. And I guess that's very healthy for each and every one of us, not only to speak about things, but also do the things ourselves that we are speaking about. It was quite tough, but it was also very rewarding. So thank you for this challenge. But let's look at why sustainable pace it matters in the first place. When we're talking about sustainable pace, it's about making a system around the way that people work so we do not overburden them. And I guess that sounds like common sense, but many years ago, Voltaire said these famous words, common sense is not so common. And I guess that I tend to agree. Why do you want to have sustainable pace? One reason is that if you get overburdened team members or stressed people that they do not work efficiently, and when they are not efficient, there's one corner that they can try to cut, that's quality. So if you are overburdening people, there is a tendency that they are delivering something that their clients will not be very happy about. What you do want in your projects, you want to have these very efficient people, the ones that are always making the right things and making them right the first time around. And I guess that you wouldn't hear anybody say that sustainable pace, well, I don't really think that's a good idea. That's quite impossible to imagine. But if we can all agree that this is a good idea, why don't we go for it then? And I am going to have a look at that in a minute. But let's have a tour in the helicopter and look at sustainability from the higher level. Not too many years ago, the United Nations, they agreed on 17 sustainability or sustainable development goals. And this is actually very high on the agenda in Denmark. Very many are talking about this, but I don't see so much concrete action where you can see, okay, besides all this talk, this is what we actually have in our hands in terms of sustainable development. What I then did was to try and see, so how do these goals that each and every one in on the globe agrees on, how do they fit with project management, and how do they fit in a business context? And I found 3 where I thought that actually makes sense to talk about sustainability in project management perspectives. And one of them was goal number 3, which is good health and well-being. The second one is decent work and economic growth. And the third one that I'm going to look into today is responsible consumption and production. So moving on to goal number 3, the good health and well-being. Well, one reason why people get overburdened That is, in fact, because we ourselves accept more work than we have the capacity to do. And sometimes that may be because we find that we're not in a position to say no. But it also means that the work that's coming on top when your manager comes and taps you on your back and say, Annette, please, can you help me doing this? It's only a 5-minute job. You are actually accepting to put new work on top of the pile that you already have, or on top of the pile that you have tried to plan in a structured way. All of a sudden, these surprises come. And the difference, the second thing I would like to mention, it is that we human beings, we are overly optimistic. We tend to think that things are less complex than they are, even if we have experiences that tells us the opposite. So we keep doing, or we keep going for the unrealistic plans that we already know are probably unrealistic, but we stick to them because, well, we are just too optimistic. And the reason why this is a bad idea is that when you are working towards some unrealistic plans, it ends up, the result will be that you are trying to hit the nail and to meet those deadlines that you already knew was not very realistic. And the problem with that behavior is that when you are pushing yourself or pushing your project team or your subordinates or whatever to do something that's not realistic, you are making them work under pressure, and they're increasing their stress levels. And then I was asking myself, Annette, did you ever experience somebody complete just one single example of an activity that was completed sooner than you planned because it was far easier than expected? And the answer I gave myself was no. I never saw, I couldn't mention one example. Sometimes you take things out of your backlog or your requirement specification, but I never experienced that something was far less complicated or complex than anticipated. But why don't we create a work system then that prevents this overloading of knowledge workers, including projects, when we know that it's a good idea to do it? I'm going to look into that as well later. The second goal was goal number 8, which was talking about decent work and economic growth. And now I guess you are probably in for a surprise. When we're leading tough projects or assignment, we get used to that we are working under pressure, we are having tough deadlines, we need to meet them, and we are sometimes working in weekends and late and so on, so forth. But it's not really sustainable to work this way. But it doesn't have to be like this. And now I'm going to show you an example, a real world example from Denmark. Let me show you what IIH Nordic did. And as mentioned, this is a story from the real world. This company was rewarded the healthiest workplace in Denmark. In 2017, IIH Nordic introduced a 4-day work week of 30 hours for everyone in the company. This change was planned. It's not something they didn't just get a bright idea and then the day after they introduced this 4-day work week. They spent several years preparing for this change. And they looked into particularly the overhead activities that people were complaining about in the company. And I guess this is a classic. They were looking at the meeting activities. Do we have meetings that are not really necessary? They tried to cut away all the meetings that were merely nice to have or not even nice to have. And then they stuck with the meetings that they said, we absolutely need to have these meetings because otherwise we can't do our work. All the rest was canceled. They talked about team structures and they talked about collaboration between these teams. And once they had done that, then they introduced the change. No cut in salary and everybody was off on Fridays. Then what happened? What was the results? Of course, you would guess that happy and motivated employees, that would be a natural result, because who wouldn't want a 4-day week instead of a 5-day week? What they also experienced was less stress, and we already know that we like that. And they also saw a staff turnover that was very close to zero, because nobody was really tempted to leave this very healthy work environment for a new 5-day week. They also experienced that the company grew, and last but not least, they experienced higher revenues. You might think that this is absolutely counterintuitive, but this is what happens in the real world. There was a book written about it. It's called The Man Who Smashed the Calendar to Make His Employees Happy. And I don't think it's in English, but I just wanted to mention that this is something that generates a lot of interest in Denmark, because we experience a lot of stress in the work environment. And if that can be fixed and still you can achieve economic growth, that's not a bad deal. Moving on to goal number 12, responsible production and consumption. In terms of projects, what does it mean that you're doing something responsibly? Well, one thing is that you need to care for your team members. You need to have empathy for your team, your colleagues, or if you are a manager, you need to have empathy for your subordinates. Because if you don't care for them and you keep asking them to do keep asking them to do the impossible, then they will get stressed, they will get burned out, or maybe even worse, they will leave the company, because why would you want to work in a workplace that is making you maybe feel sick, or at least overburdened? And that's really expensive. And why would you want to go for responsible production in projects? You want to do that because you get happy employees, and research has shown that when you have employees that can balance their work time and their private time, then they actually deliver faster and with a higher quality. And clients, it doesn't matter if you have an internal or an external customer, they love that. They love quality and they love pace in the deliveries. So that means it makes both human sense and business sense not to overwork your project team or your employees. And you might say, well, Annette, easy for you to say, but I'm not the only one saying this, because the Forbes magazine has published an article written by Tracy Brower that shows that that explains that research shows that empathy is the most important leadership skill that you can possibly look at when you are a manager. And that's quite interesting. So that also supports the idea that responsible production and consumption is a good idea in a business sense too. But it's easier to say and it's much harder to do. So let's look at why that is. I'm quite sure that all of you probably recognize this. This is an MS project plan, and it is a Gantt chart. And I'm asking you, is this a wish list or is it reality? What we tried to do was to make a plan that we thought was realistic, but usually never was. The point is that as soon as you state those deadlines, it's as if they get tattooed into your customers or your manager's brain. This is what you remember. So you are pushing your staff, your project team, to deliver according to these deadlines. And again, I'm repeating myself, that's a bad idea, because people who are working under high pressure and stress, they don't deliver very efficiently. And this is where we get to the first poll that I'm hoping that you will help answer. It looks like this. When you make a project plan, are you then convinced that your plan will stick because it always does? Or number two, do you think that it will most likely stick? Or do you think that your hit rate is more in the neighborhood of 50-50%? Number four, do you know that your plan is probably not very realistic? Or number five, even worse, do you know that you cannot deliver because the deadlines were forced on you? I'm really curious to see.
Yeah, Lo, you launch the poll, right, to let the users reply.
It looks as if we have a little of each, but let's see what happens if we can get the last few answers in.
76% participation.
Sure.
Maybe a few more could still reply.
It seems like anyway, it's the result is spread a little over all these answers. So that's quite interesting to see. And thank you everyone that joined.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for participating in this poll. Right, so I'll move on. Then Agile came along. So let's see what happened then. What you want to do in Agile system is to strike that balance between capacity and the demand for that capacity. And when you succeed in finding that balance, this is when you work with sustainable pace. This means that you're working at a pace where you can go on and on and on almost forever and deliver constantly and with constant quality as well. So since this is a fundamental practice, I guess this is what you would be expecting, but this is what happens. Teams still address too much work with overtime, and teams still neglect their own needs and take in more work than they have the capacity to do. And still burned out people will deliver poor quality and do it slowly. So that means that no matter if you're working in an Agile system or in a classic system, you still see the same mentality around sustainability. If we're looking at the Scrum process, there are some patterns that you can look at that will show you where the unsustainable pace is often the case. These are the places where you will see that you have a behavior that's not really sustainable. And one thing is when you're doing the sprint planning, are you taking in more work than you have the capacity to plan? Or do you accept that stuff is being pushed into your sprint, even though you're trying to make some good plans and you believe that this is what you can do, given the capacity that you have? These are behaviors that will demonstrate that you probably have some unsustainability built into the way that you're working, into your behavior. The same goes for Kanban if you've decided to work with the Kanban method instead. How can you detect unsustainable behavior? There's much more to Kanban than these 6 practices, but these are fundamental to make a Kanban system. And one thing you can have a look at is, do you limit work in progress? If you don't limit work in progress, then chances are that you will have too many things going on for you at the same time. And do you manage flow? And managing flow, you want to do this because you want to see how quickly does things move through your system. And if you see that you have lead time distributions that have a very long tail, and that means that you'll have a certain activity that is sometimes completed, I'm just pulling out some figures, in one day, and sometimes the same type of activity is completed in 72 days, then you have a very big spread in lead times. And that's an evidence that there's some unsustainability going on in your system. So there are ways that you can detect that your system is not completely healthy, no matter if you're working in a classic or in an Agile way. And then let's have a look at why sustainable pace is so difficult to achieve in any kind of knowledge work, basically, and certainly in project work as well. This is a slide that I often show when I'm doing webinars or giving presentations such as this one. That is usually about why it's difficult to make Agile system works. But it's exactly the same principles when you're that's at play when you are talking about working with sustainable pace. It doesn't matter if you are working Agile, if you're working with PMI's method or Prince2 or whatever. All these things are quite easy and visible. You can read a lot of literature about it, do this, do that, do the other. But the fact of the matter is that what's hidden on the dark side of the moon is what is going to make or break either your Agile initiative or, in this case, introduce sustainable pace in the way that you're working. And some of these elements are marked with yellow here. The organizational culture. Do you have a culture that accepts sustainable pace? It's also about change readiness. Are you in fact able to change? And that goes for the management level as well as the team level. Do you have the maturity and work discipline to work in this way? And most certainly about old habits, and I'm going to touch upon a few of them in a while. The management style, very importantly, managers have a big role to play here. And the governance model, how do you do your governance? So let's move on, and then I'll give you some concrete examples of those bad habits that you should try and break as soon as possible if you can. Push versus pull. Certainly in Agile systems, pull is what you are striving for. And why is that? That's because push is quite a bad idea. But this is something that we have done for many, many years, and that's the reason why it's a habit that's very hard to break. Push is when we are assigning work to individuals, when we are asking Tom, you do this, and Annette, you do that. It's also a matter of pushing new tasks via email, via phone, somebody tapping you on the back, as I mentioned before. Please, can you do it? It's only 5 minutes. And what happens when you do that is that you're putting them directly into the fast track, and you are passing all the planned work that you have been doing, or you have tried to make some plans, and then you put something on top of these plans. The result of this is random value creation. You cannot get predictability when you're working in a push type system. Push disrupts any plans that you may have made. And as mentioned, it doesn't matter whether they are Agile or classic. When we want to have pull, that's because you allow team members to take a new task when they have empty hands and when they're ready for it. And another thing that's often overlooked is that it allows you to use all the competencies and all the experiences of all the team members that you have. Because when you are distributing tasks to individual team members, you have the assumption that this guy will be the best at this particular kind of task, and so on and so forth. But you don't know necessarily all the competencies or all the experiences that all your team members have. And allowing them to pull, then they can decide, do I have the competencies to do this? If yes, then I'll just pull it. Then you all of a sudden have a collective intelligence involved that you could put to play as a project manager. And pull creates sustainable pace. And we absolutely would like to have sustainable pace. But again, it's a bad habit that's hard to break because we've been doing it for such a long time that we just see this almost as a law of nature. We're so used to thinking utilization instead of flow. And that's also a terribly bad idea. If anybody was to ask me, Annette, how long time is it going to take you to go from where you live and into the city of Copenhagen? My answer to them would be that it certainly depends on the time that I'm leaving. Because if I'm leaving in the rush hours, it's probably going to be something like 1.5 hours, maybe looking like the picture on the right-hand side, where you have the roads fully utilized. And if, on the other hand, I were to go in a time that's not rush hour time, then it's probably going to take me 20 minutes. And anybody that has ever been sitting in a traffic queue know that it's really, really a nightmare if the roads are fully utilized. And the same thing, exactly the same thing is going on when you're talking about knowledge work. When you utilize your staff 100%, then everything is going to come to almost a full stop, just like you see on the motorway on the right-hand side. So go for not overloading, in this case, your roads, but also your project team. Another way to look at this is this graph that is made by Tom and Mary Poppendick. That are those two are big on the lean in the lean space. They have been doing some research to look at how does utilization and value creation, how do they fit together? And actually, high utilization fits very badly with value creation. This graph shows you that if you have a task of a certain nature and you have utilized your people 50%, then it's going to take you 25 hours to complete this task. However, if you utilize your people 100%, it's going to take you 200 hours to complete exactly the same task. So this means that if you're focusing very hard on utilizing your people 100% of their work time, then you are going to be in a situation where where value creation will be very, very slow. So what you need to find is the balance between how much people are utilized compared to how much value they can produce. And what I would recommend, and what anybody in the lean space would recommend you, is to build in Slack into your system so that you get room to maneuver, exactly as you saw the picture before of the roads, where when there's room to maneuver, everything is moving quite quickly. So build in Slack, because it contributes to faster value creation. And then I would really like if you would participate in this poll number 2, because I'm wondering, is a focus on flow and value creation instead of utilization, is that a realistic ambition to have? And the answers that you can give me is absolutely, we already do that. I think so. We are aware that utilization impedes value creation, and then maybe some managers understand that it's a good idea to do. And number 4, I don't think so, because utilization is what we've done for a long time, and it's a hard habit to break. And then it's never going to happen. We don't believe in flow.
The poll is launched, so everyone can start answering.
This is quite interesting. Particularly, I find it interesting that there are some people whose organizations don't believe in flow. That's really interesting.
Yes, 80% has participated, so maybe 5 more seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much. And maybe it's also interesting for you guys who participate to see what's going on out there.
These are the results, so everyone can see them. Then I can stop sharing.
Thank you.
Okay.
And the winner is, maybe some managers understand. That's great. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's have a look at how we can make sustainable pace a dream come true. And for me, it might be quite natural to work this way, because I'm a convinced agilist, and I really love the idea of flow systems, because it's data-based and all of that. But I also know that it's not something that everybody would like, or this is not a way that everybody feels comfortable with. But if we take a look at sustainable pace again, and look at it from a different angle, when I'm speaking here and there, then I'm very often having a glass nearby and having a sip of water every now and again. And sometimes I lift my glass up and say, if anybody were to tell me, Annette, can you please pour a liter in this glass? Then they wouldn't probably ask me, because they would know already that 1 liter doesn't fit into this glass. It's evident that you cannot pour 1 liter of water into a small glass like mine. And the same goes for machines. You know that they have a certain capacity. And if you know that they can work 20 hours a day, then you don't try to say, oh, machine, you can do 21, you can do 22. You know that it's a bad idea, because the machine will probably break down. But when it comes to knowledge work, the same is true. People do have a maximum capacity, and it might be more hours than you are actually getting paid to work, but still you cannot push people indefinitely. They are going to break down. But many pretend that this is not the case. There is a belief that you can keep pushing more work to people that are overloaded and still expect them to meet the same deadlines and the same quality, but how can they? And the worst thing that you can possibly do is to say, okay, let's start yet another program or project, even if you know that we have already tons of projects going on. But then you start to cut people in smaller bites and say 10% for this project and 20% for this project and 50% for this project. That all works very well in Excel. But in reality, it doesn't work at all, because you cannot control when problems are going to arise on different projects. So it creates a lot of task switching, which is really expensive. There's a lot of overhead connected with that. It's just a very bad idea. So it's not possible to keep pushing stuff, keep starting more projects into an organization that are already overburdened. You shouldn't do that. Easy for me to say, and again, harder to make it happen in real life. But what can you do if you would like this to happen? And if we can agree that it's a good way to go, then we need to look back to the example of IIH company, where it was the manager that realized we can do this better, we can take care of our people and still produce as much value as we used to do. It takes leadership and leadership. But in terms of projects, sustainable pace, I've said it many times today, empathy, trust, and respect, these are buzzwords that we often hear, just as we talk about sustainability seen from the UN perspective. But these are just words. But how can we make those words become something that we can act upon? How can we make them happen in real life so that we get some concrete action out of it? How do you back them? How do you back these words up with action? If we also maybe not agree, but at least can believe that it can generate more revenues, then it would point at the leaders to take those steps that would be a win-win business-wise and also for the employees. The fact is that leaving a push regime and exchanging it with a pull principle, it will ensure faster deliverables, not because I say so, but because it has been measured over and over again in many, many programs and projects all over the world. This is a fact. But still, it's very difficult to leave that kind of regime, because you have been doing it, as I said before, through so many years. And it does take this leader to say, yes, we are going to do it. And when the going gets tough, then don't go back to what you used to do. Nothing is easier than to say, oh, it feels so comfortable. It feels so safe to go back to what we were used to. But remember that you were changing for good reasons. And from a business perspective, this would probably be dollars, but it could also be something like customer satisfaction, which many companies are also very keen on achieving. And even if it's almost counterintuitive, I would encourage you to take a leap of faith and try it out, and then see the results for yourselves. You will probably get a surprise. But it does take leadership, and a lot of it too, both when you're looking at the management level, but also on the team level and for project managers as well, because it does mean changing habits that are very old, as I've mentioned it a couple of times before. And you can say that even if sustainable pace is something that was invented in the Agile community, it's relevant to all kinds of knowledge work. It's simply good common sense that you would want, if you are asking any individual, would you like to be overworked and stressed, or would you like to work at a pace where you believe that you can deliver the best possible quality to the best of your abilities? I guess it's a no-brainer that it would be the last one that people would prefer. But gaining that sustainable pace is also a way to protect your team members and your project teams or your direct reports if you are a manager. It does require an active effort, and again, pointing back to the IIH company, it was a really dramatic change that they made, and they were planning it for several years because they knew that they would have to do so many different things and do them. They would look at many different things and do them all very differently than what they were used to. So that means that you shouldn't do this kind of change blindfolded. You should know why you want to do it, and you should know how you want to do it, but then be persistent. And when you get tempted to push more work to your team than they have the capacity, you should slap your own fingers and say, no, I remember that this is not the way to go, and there are good reasons for that. And don't start yet another project if your organization don't have the bandwidth. And one example that I can share with you, that was one company I was working with. They had, if I don't remember wrong, around 70% or 70 projects going on for them, but they didn't have more than 8 project managers. And I was saying to them, well, hey, you cannot do 70 projects with 8 project managers. And they said, well, we're not really working on them, but people get so angry when we tell them that we are not working on their projects that they will have to wait in line. And in this case, you are actually cheating. So be open about why you have prioritized the way you do, and you're doing it both to protect project delivery efficiency as well as the people working on the projects. And then moving on to one of the last slides with what I hope are the key takeaways from this presentation, is that sustainable pace is not only common sense, but it also pays off. It makes a lot of business sense as well. The second one is, one benefit that you get out of it is happier and less stressed employees. And I have talked quite a bit about the benefits that you get out of working this way. It does lead to faster value creation and higher revenues. The hard evidence again from the case from Denmark. And even if it does sound counterintuitive, this is a dream that I would recommend you to pursue, because it will give you many of the results that companies have been looking for many, many years. So take a leap of faith, go do it and see what comes out of it. And again, the concept of sustainability, it is very likely worthwhile striving for, and the whole world believes so. And this is the reason why those sustainability goals have been made by the UN. And that leads me to my contact information. If you want to connect, please feel free to do so. My blog address is here as well. And then over to the questions, if there are any after this session.
Yes, and first of all, a big thanks for that interesting presentation. It was really nice to to hear your story and to see the content that you share with us. We have some questions and also some comments. So maybe I can start with the comments from Willem and in addition to that from Karim, because I think at a certain point of time you were talking about the project plan. So the common question there was, or maybe a common comment, and let's see how you can respond to that. The plan is always a snapshot. Planning is the more important activity. It's like driving somewhere with Waze. If there's a roadblock, you go around. And so you produce a new plan. And then Karine also agreed with Willem, but she had also some other thought. However, executives not necessarily agree to re-baseline. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's exactly the same thing that you want to do. Let's say when you're working with a backlog, you know that the backlog is going to change over time, and so is your plan. But what I was trying to aim at here is the fact that when you are making a project plan end to end, then it's usually the end date that gets stuck in people's minds. Yeah. And this is where it feels like a failure when you are exceeding the time that you put in your first plan, because rather than thinking that this is an ambition that you have, people tend to think that it's carved in stone. So it's not so much for us project managers, because we already know that this is something that's going to change. The plan is almost getting old as it's as you pull the print, as you're taking it out of the printer, something has happened that will make the plan change. So what I was aiming at was to saying that it can be dangerous, and the danger that I have seen in my many years as an IT project manager is that managers and customers tend to remember those deadlines, and you as a project manager, you know that they are most likely not going to happen as they are stated in the plan. So I hope that that it makes sense. I completely agree that the plan is merely a snapshot. Completely agree.
Okay, maybe Willem or Karine, you want to comment on this, that we can go to the next question, or is this an answer to your comment?
This is an answer, but those things are also related to the fact that companies are budgeting this way. It's annual budgets. You need to predict. You need to stick a figure on it, and you need to stick a planning date on it.
Yes.
So this requires a whole new mindset from the top management.
I couldn't agree more, and this is what I'm struggling with when I'm working with my customers, because they and again, it's not to talk agility, because I know that you are aiming at the mindset when you are working in the classic way, but when you have a bunch of managers that are thinking the way that you so precisely have described, then it's very difficult to talk about agility and say that plans can change, and these are ambitions and priorities may change. And the big killer of them all is that the complexity usually grows. And furthermore, stuff that you cannot really foresee in a plan, cross-team dependencies or dependency on specialists that are not available, that delays everything. It's not top of mind with the managers. And again, I have been working with these kinds of plans for many years, and I would have my manager say to me, Annette, you are such an experienced project manager. Please make this golden plan that just sticks. They really want to believe it, but it's not the way things work. We are working with complexity, and we are working with unknown unknowns, and that alone means that it's absolutely impossible to make a plan that will stick from the day one until you finish the project.
Okay. Maybe a second question: how to use cleverly the pull mode when some tasks are mandatory to be done without getting all competencies at the time task need to start?
That's a very good question as well. The thing is that the pull thing, you can say, in fact, there are two ways of looking at it, because when you're working with a backlog or a requirement specification, and you want to determine when do I need to complete whatever task. some tasks have a fixed deadline, and that goes in Agile. I mean, nothing has changed whether you work Agile or not. There are some deadlines that you definitely need to meet. So what I'm almost tempted to say preaching is to please proactively look at each and every task that you are having in your backlog and say, am I depending on somebody else? And particularly if this task has a deadline, you need to be very accurate to look at those cross-team dependencies, because usually I haven't seen one single project team or one single Agile team that could do everything that they needed to do in their own team. They were depending on specialists or other teams or business analysts or whatever else, and they might not have the same priorities as you. So you need to make upfront make an agreement. If I need this from you, can you deliver that by that time? And if somebody is going on, I'm just saying something now, but on maternity leave or something else, then you need to figure out, okay, then what do I do? Do I need to change my plan altogether, or can I switch stuff around? So I'm looking for proactivity rather than getting this, oops, this guy was not available kind of thing. So when you do have these kind of deadlines, you need to negotiate with whomever you are depending on in good enough time to be able to deliver it at that particular time to the deadline that you might have.
Okay, thanks. Xavier, do you have other questions that you saw in the chat? I think we have 6 minutes left, so we can go through them.
Yes, so we have two, I would say several more questions. So one more, it has been done at the beginning. Is there no danger that when using the pull mode, the more complex and difficult tasks are not pulled in time? And
that's why we have project managers, because when the pull mode, that it's not a matter of of team members can decide not to pull them, because whatever you have in your requirement specification or your product backlog, you need to pull them sooner or later. And again, if you are a project manager, this is where you have a sequence. We need to do this before we do that, and so on and so forth. But the same goes in Agile systems. Here you would have the product owner deciding what do we need to do first, and then this, based on value, based on whatever else is deciding what to do first. Sometimes it's some technicalities, you need to bundle something you need to do together, but you need to have a sequence. And then from that sequence, when you pull that, when you take that into a sprint, then whoever is working in this Agile team need to pull all those tasks that are in that sprint sooner or later. So it's not a matter of letting the team decide what should be made or what should not be made. It's just a matter of saying, I don't have anything to do. Do I have the competence to pull a new task? Yes, I'll take this one and then pull it. And then you will discuss amongst your team, just as you do as a project manager with your project team. Well, guys, we need to make this now. We need to complete this task now, because otherwise we're going to get stuck. So the conversation doesn't stop. You still discuss with your team, be it Agile, be it a classic project team, how the plan is looking and what we need to do next. But it's just a matter of, rather than having the project manager distribute tasks to different team members, you say, we need to do this, and then you decide how can we get to this point and complete it in time to meet our deadlines.
Thanks a lot. So now we have two questions. I would say one could be very short and one which could take more time. So let's start with a short one. Do you know of companies with resource shortage that are willing to decrease sales to create the flow? Can you allow existing staff to go?
I didn't really get the question.
Do you know of companies with resource shortage that are willing to decrease sales to create the flow, to allow existing staff to cope?
Yeah, I mean, again, yes, I do, because particularly in Kanban that I'm working heavily with, this is the flow system. And you know that even if you distribute the tasks, if people don't have the capacity, they're not going to work on them because they can't, because the capacity is not there. And this is why we want to increase value creation and increase flow by not distributing tasks. Because imagine that you're distributing the task to somebody that's overburdening, but his colleague was sitting. Maybe he could do it, but not as quickly as the best guy, but he could still do it. But he doesn't get the chance because the task is allocated to some precisely this person. Then he's going to get overburdened, and the task is not going to be completed because he doesn't have the bandwidth. So I mean, it's not that resource scarceness has always been there in projects. Doesn't matter if you're working agile or not. I've never seen a project team that believes that we had all the resources that we could ever dream of. So that means that the prioritization is actually key. So you as a project manager, I don't know if you are a project manager, but project managers or managers, their absolutely most important task is to prioritize so that people know what to take at first, and then the next, and then the next. And then when you have the pull system, then you are more likely to get important tasks completed than when you push stuff to people that don't really have the capacity.
Okay, thanks a lot for this detailed answer. Yeah, the next one I would say, and that could be maybe the last one, or maybe one more if some people has extra minutes. Do you consider the culture as a key? Because, for example, we have a Nordic culture, we have a French culture on which, for example, French people, and I'm French, so I can tell that, are more reluctant than other, for example, other cultures, or for example, the US culture, which push the staff to the limit. What do you consider about this culture as part of the element of sustainability and the pull method?
It's a culture plays a big role because, again, I'm not saying what's good or what's bad, but it's just a fact that in Denmark, for instance, or in the Nordic countries even, we have very flat hierarchies, and we are sometimes we're even considered rude because we are very outspoken. And we no matter if it's our manager or whoever it is, we will go in and I might go and say to my manager, well, I think that you're making a big mistake by doing this, that, or the other. And in other cultures, I would be fired for doing that. So surely I'm not arguing that you should do something that will get you fired. Of course not. But it's there is again, it's there are some research being done to where are agile systems more widespread compared to other parts of the world. And here it's usually the culture. Are you very hierarchical? Are you very top-down steered? And if you are steered top-down and it's the manager that decides who does what, then I would say that flow is still the best idea. And I will say that until the day I die, to be a bit blunt. Because that's just the fact of life. But I'm not saying that it would work in any kind of culture, because if you have a very top-down managed kind of business, the managers will not accept the idea of flow. They want to decide who does what, because this is the way, this is the culture in the company, and that's part of the stuff that was hidden on the dark side of the moon in the slide that I showed you. So culture definitely plays a role. But don't give up, because even if you don't want to go all in on Scrum, for instance, you could always use Kanban, because there you don't have to change the organization or the roles, the responsibilities, and the rest of it. So there are ways where you can achieve agility without disturbing the culture or the organization as it looks today.
Thanks a lot for the answer. Yeah, so I think that we run out of time. So there is one last question. So there are two options. Either we take it, either not. So Lo, I let you decide.
I see we're still at 25, maybe then the last question. And if there are some additional questions, then we can provide them to Annette, and then she can answer them via mail, and then we can put them on the website.
That's fine with me. It's up to you how you want to do it.
Let's take it as the recording is still up. And for people who has to leave, the video code is in the chat. Yeah. So we see that it's often related to companies to make budgeting. Is there an alternative way of budgeting for companies?
Please go again.
Often, the way companies are budgeting.
Yes.
Is there any alternative way? for that?
Is that what?
An alternative way, another choice.
An alternative way, yeah.
An alternative way, another choice that companies can do.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about agile budgeting, certainly. I mean, sometimes you have a bag of money and you say you can use this amount of money, not 1 cent more, and then you need to see how much can you get from that pile of money, sort of. Or you may say, you may try to lump things together and say, we know that, I mean, maybe the minimal viable product is something that you know, that you've heard about, but that's a matter of saying, okay, what is the minimal system or product that we can possibly produce while still delivering value to our clients, and then try and budget those the big lumps within that minimal viable product to find out, okay, so how much money do we definitely need to make something that somebody would find valuable. And again, if you look in the rearview mirror, I mean, at least in Denmark, in public projects as well as in projects in the private space, you will very often see a cost overrun, and sometimes it's several hundreds% cost overruns. So I would argue that even if it might sound a bit insecure, it was never secure or safe to provide these budgets, because you see those cost overruns again and again and again. So who are we fooling here? So trying to turn things around and say, okay, can we do it a different way? And one of the arguments that I've heard many times is, no, we can't just give you a big bag of money and then we will just cross our fingers and hope that we are getting something in the end. Of course, in agile systems as well, you need to make plans end to end. Of course you do, because it's not a matter of saying, well, let's get some random value creation. It's absolutely not about that. But you need to create those plans, and it's a big misunderstanding that that you get random stuff if you go agile. But you need to figure out, how can we make a plan that supports the idea of a minimal viable product, and then if we still have some budget left, then we can prioritize. So what do we want on top of that minimal viable product? What do we want to do next? And then if it's valuable enough, then you give more budget, and you keep giving budget as long as you're producing something that your customers find valuable, rather than saying we are making a plan and we're delivering that end to end. And then some of the stuff that we have been making, and I can say that for myself from the past, has never been used because the customer didn't really need it when it came to the point. So turning it upside down and say, what do we absolutely need? And then what do we want? Then what do we want? And then budget it as we go along. Say, is it worth the while to give more money to this project? Yes or no? If yes, then we do it. If no, then we're just stopping it. But we have value, and it is used. That's the principle. So okay. There are other ways around it, and SAFe talks about lean budgeting, and it's a quite complex way to go. But there are ways to budget that are more realistic, if you're asking me.
Yeah. And I share your opinion, because the value would be most important. So back to you, Lo.
Yes. So because we're 5 minutes over time, Annette, sorry, I should recommend that you also watch the chat and maybe take a print screen of it, because everyone.
No. We can save it. We can save it and send her later on.
Oh, that would be nice. That would be nice. And I promise that I will answer the questions to the best of my ability, and yes. Then I'll send it to you, Lo.
Okay, so we will share that, of course, the questions and also the good recommendations that you regarding your presentation. Also from my side, it was really loving. I really loved it working with you. Our talks yesterday and also your presentation. So good luck in the later things that you do, and we keep in touch.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening.
Okay.
And Lo, you can just put back the video code just for people who will read the recording, who will hear the recording.
Okay.
In the chat is good, but maybe also in the PowerPoint. Don't know if you can share your screen quickly.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to I think that it was a fourth slide, then it will be shown as well.
What slide do you think? What did you say?
Number 4. Just to finish the recording with a video for people who cannot hear you live, but in replay, for example.
I'm not
Just,
quite sure what you're asking me to do.
You can go back to the fourth slide, so with the PDU, so the introduction slide.
Ah, okay. I'm sorry if I was a little slow here. Sorry about that.
And then we can end the recording with the PDU code.
Was it this one you mean?
Not able to see it, but your system will be able to make it.
Yes.
Yes, that one. Perfect.
Okay, that's great. To all others, thanks for joining, and also have a nice day, and maybe